You want everything back? Fine, I'll return every gift, down to the last one, even what you gave the kids. When Brandon demanded that his ex-wife Camille return every gift he'd ever given her, and their children, he thought he was teaching her a lesson in power. But what he didn't realize was that Camille wasn't clinging to the past anymore. She was about to box it up and burn it down. What started as an act of cruelty became a quiet reckoning, as Camille unearthed memories, pain, and truth buried beneath every gift her husband thought could be reclaimed. But the real twist? It wasn't what Camille gave back. It was what she kept. And when she rose again, this time with a brush in her hand, the entire world would witness the woman he never really saw. This is the story of betrayal, motherhood, and revenge, but painted in power, not pettiness. Stay to the end. The final scene, it changes everything. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. You're really going to pretend 12 years never happened, Brandon? Camille's voice cut across the courtroom like a blade wrapped in velvet, controlled but trembling with fury. Brandon Harper didn't flinch. If anything, his lips curled into that same smug half-smile he wore the day he told her he was leaving. "Pretend?" he said, smoothing a wrinkle in his jacket sleeve. "No, Camille. I'm just finally done pretending it meant anything." The words slammed into her chest with the force of a wrecking ball. Around them, the hum of whispers quieted. The judge hadn't even entered yet, but the damage had begun. Camille's fingers clenched tightly on the edge of the polished oak table. The courtroom lights were too bright, washing everything in a sterile glow that made even the wooden benches look like hospital beds. She glanced down at her hands, faint tremors betraying her effort to stay composed, and tucked them under the table, out of view. She would not let Brandon see her unravel. Not here. Not now. He sat across from her like a man who had already won. Confident. Relaxed. His suit flawless, not a wrinkle on him, not a care in the world. There was a time Camille used to iron those shirts, slip love notes into his briefcase. That time was dead. Next to him, Sierra Blake sat upright and poised, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a coffee tumbler marked Organic Matcha Goddess. She didn't belong in a courtroom. She looked like she'd wandered in from the set of a morning show. Camille didn't need to ask who styled her. She knew that dress. Brandon had once bought her the same brand. "For when you finally show your work in a real gallery," he'd said, back when he still believed in her. Camille tried to look away, but Sierra caught her eye and offered a tiny smirk, like a queen waving from a carriage to a peasant. A chill raced down Camille's spine. "Camille?" A low voice whispered beside her. Sasha Cohen, her attorney, leaned in. Steady, sharp, always precise. "You okay?" Camille gave a slow nod, eyes never leaving Brandon. "Just get me through this." Sasha offered a sympathetic look. "You've already survived the worst of it. Today is just paperwork." But Camille knew better. Paperwork doesn't bleed. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Ramirez entered, stoic, silver-haired, and known throughout Oak Ridge County for his no-nonsense courtroom. His gavel struck once. "Final divorce proceedings, Harper vs. Harper. Let's begin." Camille braced herself. The legal proceedings moved like a slow, bitter river. Custody affirmed in her favor, child support mandated by law but nothing more, visitation terms vaguely outlined. Camille heard the words, but they felt distant. She sat rigid, watching Brandon shift in his seat, his movements calculated, performative. When Judge Ramirez reached for his gavel to adjourn, Camille felt a tremor of relief. One more second and she might actually breathe. But then Brandon stood. "Your Honor, if I may, there's one more matter I'd like to address before we close." Camille's heart stopped. Judge Ramirez paused, peering over his glasses. "Yes, Mr. Harper?" Brandon glanced at Sierra, who nodded subtly. He cleared his throat. "I'd like to formally request the return of specific gifts I gave Miss Harper during the course of our marriage, items of significant monetary value." The air in the room turned to glass. Camille blinked. Had she heard that right? Judge Ramirez frowned. "You're referring to gifts, Mr. Harper? Please clarify." Brandon leaned forward, his voice perfectly modulated as if he'd rehearsed it. "Yes, Your Honor. Jewelry. Designer handbags, a crystal vase, several items of substantial worth. I'd like them returned. A pin could have dropped. Sasha sat up straight, eyes sharp as razors. Objection. Gifts given during a marriage are legally considered property of the recipient unless otherwise noted in a prenuptial agreement. Mr. Harper has no legal standing to demand them back. The judge nodded. That's correct. Unless you intend to file a separate civil claim and provide documented valuation, this request is irregular at best. But Brandon didn't flinch. I'm aware, he said smoothly, but I'm asking for her agreement, voluntarily. Camille turned slowly, locking eyes with him. There was no regret, no shame, just that same hollow smile. The emerald necklace, the 5th anniversary. The night she'd gone into labor with Eli and he'd panicked, then cried with joy. The silver bracelet, a gift after her first gallery showing, a symbol of pride. You're not just a mom, Camille, you're magic. The earrings from Paris, the only night in the last 2 years they'd laughed like lovers. He wanted them all. Sasha whispered urgently. You don't have to respond, he's baiting you. Let me shut this down. But Camille didn't move. Something deep inside her had frozen. Then Brandon added, and anything given to the kids, if it cost over $50. A collective gasp rippled across the courtroom. Sasha stood instantly, fire in her voice. This is an outrage, but Camille reached out and placed a hand on her arm. No, she said softly. Let him talk. Judge Ramirez, looking more exhausted by the second, leaned forward. Miss Harper, I must reiterate that you are on no legal obligation to respond to this request. Camille inhaled, exhaled, and stood. She looked not at the judge but at Brandon. I'll return everything. The silence that followed was thick. Brandon's mouth opened slightly, caught off guard by her swift agreement. Sierra blinked. Sasha whispered, Camille, think this through. But Camille's voice was steady, clear. The necklace, the earrings, the bracelet, the bags, the vase, the kids' gifts, all of it. If it cost more than $50, he can have it. The judge leaned back slowly. Are you certain? Camille nodded. I don't want this to drag out. Let him have the things. I'm done holding on to things that don't matter. For the first time, Brandon's confident mask cracked. He shifted uncomfortably. Sierra's smile faltered. Camille turned to Sasha. Let's wrap it up. As she gathered her things, Camille didn't cry, didn't scream. She walked out of the courtroom with a grace that made even the clerk stop and watch. Brandon thought he'd won. But he hadn't realized she was just getting started. The courthouse steps blurred beneath Camille's feet as she descended them, her heels tapping a rhythm of defiance. Every part of her body was trembling, but her posture didn't give an inch. She could feel eyes on her, from the bailiff, from the court assistant who'd smirked earlier, from strangers who had no idea what had just unfolded inside. Brandon and Sierra didn't follow her out. Of course not. They were likely still inside, soaking up their own warped version of victory, convinced they'd stripped her bare. But Camille wasn't bare. She was shedding. She reached the bottom step and exhaled slowly. It felt like the first real breath she'd taken in months. Sasha caught up to her, heels clacking hastily behind. Camille, that was a power move, but we could have fought that. You didn't need to give in to him. You don't owe him a damn thing. Camille turned, her eyes soft but unyielding. I know. That's why I did it, because I don't owe him. Not even a fight. Sasha stared at her a beat longer, then slowly nodded. You're stronger than I thought. Camille didn't answer. She didn't need to. That night, she stood in her living room staring at the shelves, the drawers, the velvet boxes, the hidden corners where pieces of their life had been stored like fragile treasure. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of shared holidays, reconciliations, empty apologies, and too many second chances. She could barely remember the last time Brandon had looked at her with anything but disdain. She started in the hallway closet, pulling down a sleek black box. Inside, the emerald necklace. She sat on the carpet, fingers hovering over it. It had been the last thing he gave her before Eli was born. He'd wept that night, held her hand in the hospital and whispered that nothing would ever come before their family. He even prayed with her. He, a man who scoffed at the very idea of God. And now he wanted it back like it was a deposit. Camille rose, carried the necklace into the dining room, and opened a cardboard box. She set it down like she was handling an artifact. In a way, she was. She moved through the house like a surgeon, precise, quiet, unflinching. Every object had its memory, and every memory had a crack running through it. The silver bracelet from the silent auction, packed. The designer clutch she wore at his company gala, where he'd pretended she was just a pretty accessory, packed. The crystal vase she'd filled with fresh lilies every week to make their kitchen feel like a home, packed. She didn't cry. Not yet. The tears were still somewhere deep, trapped beneath months of survival. The next morning, after Eli and Ava left for school, Camille walked into their bedrooms. That's when it got hard. Eli's room smelled like pine wood and old books. His telescope still sat at the window, aimed at the early morning sky. She walked to it slowly, her reflection flickering in the brass frame. She touched it, then recoiled as if it burned her. Brandon had given it to him on Christmas, swearing they'd map the stars together. They never had. She took it apart gently, wrapping each section in bubble wrap, placing it with quiet reverence into another box labeled Harper Kids. Ava's room was softer. Fairy lights, a pale lavender comforter, a bulletin board covered in glittery stickers. Camille knelt beside her daughter's nightstand and opened the music box. It still played that soft lullaby, the one Ava needed every night to sleep. Camille's hand trembled as she packed it. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry, baby," before sealing the box. By sunset, 5 boxes sat by the door, labeled, taped, stacked like coffins. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the couch, pen in hand, and began writing. A list. Not for herself, for him. Item by item, she recorded everything she was returning. The earrings from Paris, the suede heels from their 10th anniversary, the books Brandon gave Eli, the charm bracelet for Ava's dance recital. Every item had a price, and Camille wrote each one down with surgical precision. Not for spite, but to confront Brandon with the absurdity of his own pettiness. It was, she realized, a catalog of vanity, a museum exhibit of ego. Halfway through the list, she paused, then flipped the page and added one line across the top. Requested returns, value estimated, sentimental worth, priceless, emotional damage, incurable. When she sealed the list in an envelope and tucked it into the top box, she felt a shift. Not closure, but clarity. He wanted things? Fine. Let him be surrounded by things. Cold, gleaming, useless things. Let them clutter his life the way his choices had cluttered hers with pain. She was done. The next day, she called a courier company. "Yes, I need to schedule a residential delivery. 5 boxes. Address provided upon confirmation." She gave them Brandon's new condo, an upscale gated property near the city's riverfront. She made sure delivery would occur on a weekday morning when Sierra was most likely to be there. Then she sat at the kitchen table and waited, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Her children came home hours later. Eli dropped his backpack on the floor. "Hey, Mom, why is the living room empty?" Camille stood. "Can we sit for a second?" They all sat, Camille, Eli, and Ava, on the carpet in the space where their shared history had once been displayed on shelves, where trophies and gifts once gleamed. "I sent your dad some things," she said gently. Ava frowned. "Like what?" Camille forced a smile. "Things he asked for. The gifts he gave us." Eli's eyes hardened. "You mean like my telescope?" She nodded. "That's messed up," he muttered. Ava's voice was smaller, almost scared. "Even my music box?" Camille swallowed. "Yes, sweetheart, I didn't want to, but we don't need those things to be happy, right?" Ava nodded, curling against Camille's side. Eli stared ahead, his fists clenched. "He promised we'd stargaze this summer," he said. "Guess promises don't mean anything to him." Camille reached for his hand. "You and I will find new stars together. We don't need his telescope for that." And she meant it. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Camille walked to the boxes stacked in the foyer. She ran her hand along the top. Tomorrow, they'd be gone, and with them, the remnants of a life she didn't want back. She whispered aloud, as if Brandon could hear her. "Here's your empire of dust. I hope you choke on it." She turned off the lights. The morning of the delivery came with an eerie calm. The spring air carried a faint breeze through the screen door as Camille stood in her driveway, arms folded across her chest, watching the courier van back in. It was 10:02 a.m. The same time Brandon used to text her every morning. "Coffee yet, babe?" That was before Sierra. Before late meetings and lipstick stains that didn't match hers. Before 12 years of marriage were wiped away in favor of glitter and ego. The driver, a stocky man with a baseball cap and calloused hands, hopped down and gave her a professional nod. 5 boxes, she nodded, by the door. He glanced toward the porch and raised a brow. Tightly packed. I wanted to make sure nothing breaks, she said, her voice smooth. He chuckled. Sending something fragile? No, she replied after a pause, just letting go. The man didn't ask questions after that. As he loaded each box into the van, Camille felt a strange stillness settle over her. Not peace, not yet, but a soft awareness that she was no longer carrying the weight. Every taped carton he hauled away contained a memory she no longer needed. Her past, boxed and measured. Inside, Camille leaned against the kitchen sink and watched the van pull out of the driveway. It was over. And yet, her hand trembled as she reached for her tea, now tepid in its mug. Because letting go was never clean. It was grief wrapped in packaging tape. It was the ache in her bones when she stepped into Ava's room and saw the empty shelf where the music box used to sing her daughter to sleep. But it was also something else. It was freedom. That evening, Camille sat with a pen and her notebook, the one where she recorded things she didn't want to say out loud. Pages and pages of silent screams, of guilt, of should-haves and almosts. This time, she wrote only a single line. What he took was expensive. What I kept is priceless. She closed the book. She didn't need to document the pain anymore. The story had already begun to write itself without him. Across town, the courier van rumbled into the cul-de-sac of Brandon Harper's new upscale apartment complex. Sleek, sterile, and soulless, like every decision he'd made since walking out. The boxes were unloaded onto the concrete porch like offerings to a man who had no idea how much they truly cost. Brandon signed the delivery slip with a grin, barely glancing at the courier. Sierra appeared in the doorway, wrapped in silk and perfume, her eyes gleaming as she surveyed the boxes like treasure chests. They actually sent them, she said, amused. Thought she'd put up a fight. She's too proud, Brandon said with a shrug. Figured she'd want the last word. He didn't know she'd already had it. It was written inside the final box, buried beneath receipts, memories, and the truth. They began opening the boxes with a kind of glee that Camille once reserved for Christmas mornings with Eli and Ava. Sierra gasped as she pulled out the emerald necklace, holding it up to the light. I'm keeping this, she declared, slipping it around her neck. It looks better on me anyway. Brandon laughed and tugged open another box, one filled with children's items. He hesitated only for a moment before lifting the telescope. He turned it over, frowning slightly, then set it aside like a toy he'd outgrown. Rose's music box came next. It chimed once as he opened it. The tune was haunting. Sierra wrinkled her nose. That's creepy. Throw it out. Brandon didn't respond. He set it down gently, which surprised even himself. Then came the photographs, dozens of them. Camille had included them without explanation. They were candid, joyful, vivid slices of a life he once called his own. Eli's toothy grin at a science fair. Ava's glitter-covered fingers during arts and crafts. Camille's sunlit face holding both children on a windswept beach. Each image stabbed with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Sierra flipped through a few and scoffed. What are we supposed to do with these? Hang up your ex-wife's scrapbook. But Brandon didn't laugh this time, because he recognized the handwriting on the back of each one. Camille's loopy cursive had always felt like home. Eli's first bike ride, April 2017. Ava's first recital, November 2019. The best weekend of our lives before everything changed. He reached into the bottom of the box and pulled out the folder. Receipts, for things he'd never bothered to ask about. Eli's winter coat, Ava's summer camp, school fees, dance shoes, everything Camille had covered without ever asking for help. She'd just done it. Behind the receipts was a single letter, her handwriting unmistakable. Brandon unfolded it, his heart suddenly racing. You asked for everything back, so here it is. Every item, every trinket, every gift that had your name on the tag. But the things that mattered, love, time, care, you never gave. I kept those, for me, for Eli, for Ava. You can't return what was never offered. The paper slipped from his hand and floated gently to the floor. Brandon didn't speak. Sierra twirled in front of the mirror, admiring the necklace. Well, she said, smirking, I guess this means we won. Brandon didn't answer, because somewhere in his chest the silence had begun to echo. Back at home, Camille lit a candle and sat with her children on the back porch. The sky was clear. Eli pointed out constellations with his fingers. Ava nestled into her side. Camille looked up at the stars, the real ones, and smiled. Mom, are we moving? Ava's voice came softly from the hallway, barely above a whisper. Her small frame hovered near the edge of the living room, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. Her big brown eyes flicked from Camille to the stack of boxes by the door, now half gone, picked up earlier that morning. The remaining few sat like silent reminders of something being stripped away. Camille closed the dishwasher, turned, and smiled with practiced calm. No, sweetheart, we're not moving. Ava stepped closer. Then why are all those boxes packed up like we are? Camille motioned for her to sit. Come here. Eli followed soon after, his footsteps slower, heavier. At 15, he didn't ask questions the same way his sister did. He didn't whisper. He didn't wonder. He already knew. Camille could see it in the rigid set of his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed slightly when he caught sight of the sealed boxes. They all sat on the rug together, just like they used to for game nights. Only tonight, the Monopoly board was gone, and in its place was an invisible weight none of them could ignore. These are just some things, Camille began, that your dad asked for. Ava tilted her head. Like what things? Camille hesitated, then said gently, things he gave us, gifts, from before. There was a long pause. Ava looked confused. Eli looked furious. My telescope? Eli asked suddenly, his voice already thick. Camille's chest tightened. Yes, baby. Eli flinched. He said we'd use it this summer, that we'd stargaze on the roof like we did last year. He stood up abruptly, pacing. He said. He promised. Camille stood too, placing a hand on his shoulder. I know he did, and I'm so sorry. Eli shrugged her hand off and turned away. It's just a stupid telescope. But Camille knew better. It wasn't about the telescope. It was about what it represented. Those few rare nights when Brandon had shown up as a real father. When he'd explained the stars to Eli, pointing out Orion's belt and making up silly names for the ones he didn't know. For a boy who spent most of his time trying to pretend his dad's absence didn't hurt, those nights had mattered. Ava reached into her backpack, pulled out a stuffed bunny, and clutched it tightly. Camille turned back to her. The music box, she said gently. That had to go too. Ava didn't cry. Not yet. She just looked down at the bunny, her thumb absently brushing its ear. It played Twinkle Twinkle, she murmured. I liked falling asleep to it. Camille knelt, holding her daughter's face between both hands. We'll find a new song, one just for us. But that one was from Daddy, Ava whispered. Camille felt her resolve wobble, her voice nearly cracked. I know, sweetie. There was a silence then, heavy and aching. I hate him, Eli said suddenly, the words exploding like shrapnel. Camille looked at him sharply. Don't say that. Why not? He shot back. He deserves it. He's the one who walked away. He's the one who chose her. He's the one who wants our stuff back like we're just trash he loaned you during a yard sale. Camille blinked. The imagery cut deep because she felt it too. She stood and wrapped her arms around him despite his resistance. He didn't hug her back, not at first, but slowly his body leaned into hers. A silent surrender. You have every right to be angry, she murmured into his shoulder. But don't let him take more from you by holding on to hate. That's not who you are. He nodded, but it was slow and reluctant. They stayed like that until Ava tugged at Camille's sweater. Can we get a new music box? Camille knelt beside her. Yes, we'll get one together, and we'll find a song just for you. Ava smiled faintly. Can I choose the color? Any color you want. That night, after the kids went to bed, Camille walked through the house with a notepad. The boxes were gone now, delivered to Brandon's doorstep with her note tucked inside, but she still felt the need to inventory what was missing. Not the items, the feeling. She stood in Eli's room, staring at the empty windowsill where the telescope once stood. She could still hear his 10-year-old voice shouting, I found Jupiter, into the warm night. She walked into Ava's room. The space where the music box had rested now looked like a crater. She ran her fingers along the shelf's edge, then turned away. In the kitchen, she sat down with the notepad. At the top she wrote, What's gone? Then she paused. A long pause. Then on the next page she wrote, What remains? And beneath it, Eli's curiosity, Ava's laughter, our bedtime routine, Saturday pancakes, Sunday morning cartoons, a front porch with room for dreaming, a future I get to paint, not just survive. She sat back, tears spilling freely now, but not from sorrow, from the sweet, brutal truth of it all. He could take the objects, but he couldn't touch the soul of this family. That night, she didn't cry into a pillow. She didn't pace. She opened her closet, pulled out a blank canvas, set it on the easel by the window, and began to paint. The first stroke was dark blue, bold and unforgiving. But beneath it, in every brush of color, was something more. Something rising. The courier's van pulled up to the sleek concrete curb outside the Riverstone residences, an opulent complex with mirrored windows and an ego taller than its penthouse suites. Brandon Harper stood waiting in the shade of a tall glass awning, arms folded over his chest, the collar of his golf polo stiff with starch. From a distance, he looked like success, confidence, control. But inside, something fidgeted. He wouldn't admit it, not to himself, not to Sierra, but he'd woken up uneasy that morning. He'd checked the time twice, paced the kitchen, and polished a whiskey glass he didn't even use. Camille's silence had made him nervous. Her compliance had made him suspicious. He thought she'd fight him. He thought she'd cry. She hadn't. The delivery truck backed up to the building with a low groan. Two uniformed men hopped out, exchanging a look as they saw Brandon's polished shoes and Sierra's silk robe through the glass doors. They rolled 5 large boxes to the curb, their Sharpie labels facing out. Harper. Returned items. Gifted goods. Kids included. One of the drivers handed Brandon the clipboard. Need a signature. Brandon didn't read the receipt. He scrawled his name in a flash of ink and motioned toward the door. Bring them in. Sierra appeared behind him in towering heels, sipping a green smoothie and wearing a satin wrap that barely touched her knees. Well, she said with a coy smile, let's see what the ex decided to send back, They moved inside together, the delivery crew stacking the boxes just inside the living room, pristine and cold, more showroom than home. Sierra clapped her hands like a child on Christmas morning. Ooh, do we open them now? Brandon smirked. Be my guest. She didn't wait for a second invitation. The first box she opened was layered in tissue paper, meticulously wrapped. She tore into it like it was a clearance rack at Bergdorf's. Out came the emerald necklace, polished, gleaming, radiant in the light. Oh my God, she gasped, holding it up to her throat. Look at this. Camille wore this with a turtleneck. Can you believe it? She clasped it on with a flourish and spun toward the mirror. Stunning, Brandon murmured, though he wasn't looking at her. He was watching the box, the careful wrapping, the precision. Camille's scent still clung faintly to the silk of the tissue. Sierra kept digging. Diamond earrings next, then the silver bracelet. Jackpot. She purred. He nodded but didn't smile. She reached into the next box. Designer handbags, vintage clutches. The crystal vase he once claimed was too delicate for everyday use. Sierra handled it all like spoils of war. This is what victory smells like, she said, burying her face in a leather purse. Brandon chuckled weakly. Enjoy. But something about the next box made his stomach knot. It was heavier, denser. Labeled Harper, children's items. He cut the tape slowly. Inside were things he hadn't seen in years. Eli's telescope, disassembled and neatly wrapped. The one he'd bought for Christmas when his son was 10, the year he promised they'd camp under the stars all summer. He picked it up and turned it in his hands. The metal was cold. Heavy. It felt wrong. He set it down. Ava's music box was next. Its carved roses still intact, its hinges still soft. He opened it. The lullaby played. The melody stopped Sierra mid-twirl. What is that? She said, her lip curling. Music box, Brandon muttered, gently closing it. Ugh, creepy. She turned back to the mirror. Toss it. He didn't answer. The charm bracelet followed, its little ballet slipper charm still jingling. Then the astronomy books. His handwriting filled the margins of some pages, where he once sat with Eli explaining lunar phases. Next came drawings, children's drawings, a lopsided rocket ship, a stick figure family labeled Me Mommy Daddy Ava. Bright suns and pink houses and grinning smiles scrawled in crayon. He froze. Sierra glanced over. Oh, please don't get sentimental. But he wasn't listening anymore. He reached into the box and found a photo album. Not store-bought, handmade. Black cardstock pages. Gold corners. Each photo taped gently in place, captions written in Camille's graceful script. Eli's first day of school. Ava's recital. She nailed the spin. Brandon teaching Eli constellations. His throat tightened. He flipped to a Christmas photo. Camille beaming in a red sweater, her arm around him, the kids on either side. There were lights strung around the living room. He remembered that moment. Vaguely. It had felt easy. Too easy to appreciate at the time. He looked up and caught Sierra watching him, her smile tight. "I know what you're thinking," she said, folding her arms. "You're remembering the version of her that didn't yell, didn't sigh, didn't make you feel like a stranger in your own house." Brandon didn't reply. He went back to the box. At the bottom was a sealed manila envelope. He opened it. Receipts. Dozens of them. Organized by year, each item labeled: Eli's school supplies, $73.50. Ava's ballet shoes, $46.90. Science camp, $450. Page after page of proof, of care, of investment, of presence. Then, one final note. Handwritten, no signature. "You asked for what you gave. Here it is. What you didn't give. Love, effort, presence, you can't get back. That's what stayed with us. That's what mattered. That's what you lost." His hands shook. Sierra plucked the note from his grip and read it aloud, laughing bitterly. God, she's dramatic. What a martyr. But Brandon didn't laugh. He didn't move. He sat down on the couch and stared at the telescope, the music box, the photographs. And suddenly Sierra's voice felt very far away. "I need air," he mumbled. Rising and walking out onto the balcony, the city buzzed below him. Horns, sirens, life. But all he could hear was Ava's music box playing its soft lullaby in his head, and Camille's handwriting echoing in his mind. That's what you lost. The air on the balcony was thin. At least that's how it felt to Brandon. He leaned on the glass railing, gripping the edge like it could anchor him to the version of himself he was still pretending to be. Sierra's voice called faintly from inside, something about dinner reservations and a new wine bar. But he didn't answer. He couldn't. He was still holding the photograph. It was one of the last in the album. Ava was maybe 5, smeared with chocolate cake, giggling in Camille's arms while Eli held a balloon in the background. Brandon had taken that photo. He remembered it so clearly. The way Camille looked at him afterward, like he had captured something eternal. Back then, she used to say they were building a universe for their children. And now, he'd traded that universe for a high-rise with cold tile floors and walls so clean they echoed. He pushed the photo back into the album, closed it, and wandered back inside. Sierra was standing over the boxes again, pulling out the smaller one they hadn't opened yet. "What's this?" she asked, more to herself than him. "It's lighter." Brandon frowned. "Be careful with that one." Sierra sliced the tape and opened the flaps. Inside was a bundle of handmade cards, their colors faded with time. Next to them, stacks of crayon drawings and a few school notebooks bound together with a rubber band. "Oh God," she muttered, lifting one out. "To Daddy, you're my superhero. Love, Eli." She laughed. "You want this, or can I toss it?" Brandon didn't move. Sierra raised an eyebrow. "Babe?" He reached out and gently took the drawing from her hand. Then the next one. And the next. One by one, he sat on the floor, legs crossed, spreading them around him like puzzle pieces of a life he had lost the instructions for. Ava had drawn them all as mermaids once. He'd laughed so hard he nearly cried. Eli's depiction of their family as dinosaurs. A thank you note Camille must have made them right after Brandon brought home cupcakes one random Tuesday. It was all here. And it was unbearable. Sierra hovered a few feet away now, arms folded. "So what? You're just gonna sit there in the middle of all this kid junk and sulk?" Brandon didn't answer. His eyes landed on a thin sketchbook at the bottom of the box. He opened it. It was filled with Camille's handwriting, little journal entries she must have made during those early years. Quotes from the kids, notes about milestones, private reflections she'd never shared. Eli cried when Brandon left for his work trip. He didn't say it, but I think he's starting to feel the distance. Ava told me she dreams about stars, said Daddy promised to show her where wishes go. I wish Brandon would come back, not physically, but emotionally. Each sentence was a gut punch. He didn't realize Sierra had left the room until the silence deepened. She had vanished into the bedroom, leaving him surrounded by everything he never paid attention to. Everything he'd called extras. Everything Camille had carried for years without him even noticing. At the bottom of the sketchbook was a single loose sheet of paper, tucked in as if added last. He pulled it free and stared at it. A letter. "Brandon, you won't understand this now, maybe not ever, but I'm giving you this not to shame you, but to release myself. These are our children's memories. Not yours to sell, not mine to keep locked away in grief. They belong to time now. You asked for everything you ever gave. Here it is. I kept what matters. I hope one day you'll understand what that really means." His chest caved inward. He doubled over, the weight of her words breaking through the last layer of denial. All this time, he had convinced himself he was justified, that she'd changed, that she'd grown cold, that Sierra's laughter was lighter, that her world was easier. But what he felt now wasn't loss. It was hollowness. Real, gaping, air-sucking emptiness. The door creaked behind him. Sierra stood there, arms crossed, annoyance written in every line of her body. "You gonna sit in here all night, playing the grieving ex-husband?" she snapped. "Because I didn't sign up for this pity party." He stood slowly, placing the sketchbook gently in the box. "Don't talk about her," he said softly. Sierra scoffed. "Oh, now you want to play noble?" Brandon walked past her without another word. Into the kitchen, to the garage. It was the only place in the apartment that didn't smell like air freshener and expensive lotion. It was cold, dim, stacked with unopened boxes he hadn't gotten around to organizing, forgotten things. Just like this version of himself, he dropped to the floor and cried. For Camille, for Eli, for Ava, for every bedtime story he didn't read, every recital he skipped, every Sunday morning Camille carried alone, for the man he used to be, and the man he never became. The phone rang at 6:42 p.m. Camille was stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce, humming softly as Ava practiced cartwheels in the backyard, and Eli worked through his physics homework at the dining table. The world felt warm again, wounded, yes, but stable, hers. She wiped her hands on a towel and checked the screen. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something in her chest tightened. A sixth sense. A shadow she hadn't seen in weeks. "Hello?" she said, guarded. There was a pause. Then came a voice, sugary and slow, as if dipped in poison and honey. "Camille, darling, it's Sierra." Camille froze. She hadn't spoken to Sierra since the courtroom. She hadn't wanted to. Her fingers curled tighter around the towel, her other hand slowly pressing the phone tighter against her ear. "What do you want?" she said flatly. "Oh, I just thought I'd check in," Sierra chirped, voice smooth as glass. "You know, see how you're holding up." Camille didn't answer. Sierra filled the silence like a disease. "It must be hard, I imagine, watching your whole world packed into boxes and shipped away, losing the man, the gifts, the lifestyle." She let the word lifestyle hang in the air like smoke. "I'm fine," Camille said. "So if that's all—" No, there's more," Sierra said with a grin Camille could hear. "I just thought I'd share a little moment with you. Right now, as we speak, I'm wearing that emerald necklace you returned. It catches the light so beautifully in this apartment. Leon can't stop staring." Camille's stomach clenched, her jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Then I'm glad it found a new home. You both deserve each other." But Sierra wasn't finished. She dropped her voice into a silkier tone, the kind reserved for knives just before they plunge in. "You know what turns me on the most, Camille?" she purred. "Knowing I took everything from you, the man, the house, the jewelry, even your kids' toys. You're the ex-wife, I'm the victory." Camille's body went still. The heat from the stove, the bubbling of the pot, she didn't feel it anymore. Only a slow, steady burn in her chest that began to rise, a fire long buried, a rage tightly coiled. She closed her eyes, and then she laughed, low at first, quiet, then louder. A cold, measured sound that made Sierra pause on the other end. "Oh, Sierra," Camille said, her voice laced with acid and elegance. "You didn't win anything." Sierra's tone shifted. "Excuse me? You're not a victory," Camille said calmly. "You're a placeholder. You didn't conquer a kingdom. You moved into a haunted house and called yourself queen." There was silence. Camille kept going. "You think wearing my jewelry gives you power? You think stripping a man's past from cardboard boxes means you've taken his soul? You didn't steal my life, Sierra. You inherited my leftovers." Sierra's tone cracked. "How dare you?" "No," Camille cut in, her voice steel. "How dare you call me gloating over a necklace like you earned something? That necklace was a gift after a night my son was born, when Leon cried and told me we'd be a family forever. You weren't there. You have no idea what those things mean. You only know how they look." "You bitter little—" Camille's voice rose, calm and commanding. "You're not wearing my jewels. You're wearing my grief. Every bracelet, every pair of earrings, those are the chains that held me through broken promises and lonely nights. And you're wearing them like trophies." Sierra stammered. "He loves me now." "No," Camille said, voice quiet again. "He doesn't. He loves being needed, until it bores him. Then he finds a new rescue. Enjoy the countdown. The line went quiet. Camille waited. She could hear Sierra's breath, now shallow, shaken. Camille twisted the knife gently. You called me for a reaction. You wanted a breakdown. You wanted to hear me cry, but you forgot something, Sierra. Grief made me fireproof. She ended the call with one flick of her thumb and dropped the phone onto the counter. Ava tumbled into the kitchen, beaming. Did you hear that one, Mom? I almost landed it. Camille turned, her chest still burning, but it was a different burn now. A clean fire. She opened her arms. Show me again, sweetheart. I'm watching. Camille closed the door to her bedroom that night with a gentle click, waited until the sound of Ava's soft breathing down the hall steadied her nerves, and sat alone in the dark. The earlier heat from her confrontation with Sierra had faded, leaving in its place something far colder, far quieter. Not sadness, not even rage. Emptiness. She had stood tall, she had spoken with fire. But now, in the stillness of her bedroom, with no one watching, the silence folded over her like a wet blanket, suffocating, heavy. She stared at the ceiling. Her mind played games. He didn't even fight for you. He asked for the gifts back, even the kids. You were a decade of his life. He reduced it to a list with price tags. He didn't just let you go, he discarded you. She curled into herself. The bed felt too big, the room too quiet. Sleep didn't come. The next morning, she made eggs she didn't eat. She packed lunches she barely remembered assembling. She kissed Ava's forehead and nodded absently Eli's quiet, "Love you, Mom," as he grabbed his backpack. As soon as the front door closed, Camille sank to the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet, and wept. Not because of Brandon, not even because of Sierra, because it had finally hit her. There was no apology coming. No justice. No return of dignity. No storybook redemption where the wrongdoer realized the depths of his betrayal and came back with contrition and flowers. There was just this. The aftermath. By noon, the tears had dried, but the ache remained. Camille lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun, counting the revolutions just to feel time pass. A knock at the door startled her, but it was just a delivery, Eli's school project supplies. She barely remembered ordering them. By 2 p.m., the spiral was pulling harder. She thought about calling Sasha, about telling her she wasn't okay, that it was all catching up, but she didn't want to burden her. Sasha was a lawyer, not a therapist, and Camille wasn't sure she could form the words without shattering. She sat at the kitchen table and opened her notebook, the same one where she'd written her list of what remained. Her hand hovered over the page. Then slowly, shakily, she wrote, I don't feel strong. I feel broken. I want to disappear. I can't breathe through the weight of all the days I still have to survive. She stared at the words, then underlined, can't breathe. At 3:37 p.m. she picked up the phone. It rang twice. Then Camille? It was Sasha's voice. Warm, immediate, steady. Camille didn't even try to fake it. I'm not okay, she whispered. I think I need help. Sasha didn't hesitate. I've got you. I'm going to call someone I trust. And you're going to be okay, but right now, you don't have to do this alone. Within hours, Sasha had arranged a place for her, the Oak Ridge Recovery Center. Quiet, confidential. 7 days of rest, therapy, and space to breathe. Her sister Denise took the kids without question. Take care of yourself, Cam. We've got them. Camille hugged Ava goodbye, kissed Eli on the forehead. I'll be back in a week, she said. Promise. Eli frowned. Are you sick? She thought about lying, but then she remembered that strength didn't mean hiding. No, she said, just healing. The center was quiet. White walls, soft sheets, the scent of lavender. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Arliss, didn't ask for details on day one. She simply said, I'm here when you're ready. Camille wasn't ready. Not at first. She slept for 13 hours her first night. On day 2, she walked around the garden path 4 times without speaking. On day 3, she finally sat in the therapy chair and said, he made me feel like I was nothing. Dr. Arliss waited. Camille's voice cracked. And now I can't tell if I'm anything without him. And for the first time since the divorce began, someone didn't tell her to be strong, they just let her say it. Every unspoken ache, every moment she doubted her worth, every time she wanted to scream. She didn't paint during those 7 days. She didn't journal. She just existed. And slowly that became enough. On day 5, she woke to sunlight on her face and didn't immediately feel dread. She stretched and felt her spine realign like a puzzle piece falling into place. She sat in the common room with a cup of tea and thought, maybe I can still build something, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. On her last evening, Dr. Arliss handed her a blank card and said, if you could write to yourself a year ago, what would you say? Camille sat with the pen for a long time. Then slowly she wrote, you're not weak because you loved someone who couldn't love you back. You're not broken because you hoped for more. You're allowed to grieve a man who never grieved you. And when you're ready, you will rise. Not because he regrets it, but because you remember who you are. She folded the card, placed it in her suitcase, and packed to go home. Camille stepped through her front door just before noon, the Saturday sun painting golden rectangles on the hardwood floor. The house was quiet. Denise had taken the kids out for pancakes and a movie, and the silence for once didn't feel heavy. It felt like space, like breath. She stood in the doorway for a long time, her suitcase resting beside her like a suitcase in an airport for a trip she didn't finish. She wandered from room to room, noting the small signs of life in her absence. Ava's glittery socks draped over the arm of the couch, a cereal bowl in the sink, Eli's half-finished drawing on the kitchen table. It was messy. It was theirs. It was hers. She opened the fridge. Eggs. Milk. A stick of butter with bite marks, probably Ava playing mouse again. She smiled, and then she did something she hadn't done in months. She went to the hall closet and pulled out her easel. The canvas was still there, blank and expectant. She set it by the window where the light hit best and stood in front of it, brush in hand. For a long while she didn't move, but inside her something was shifting. She dipped the brush in crimson red and made a single stroke across the canvas. It was bold, raw, a beginning. Then came indigo, then gold, then black, swirled in arcs that danced and clashed like dueling memories. By the time the kids came home, she was elbow-deep in paint and had 3 streaks across her cheek. Ava gasped, "Mom, you're painting again." Eli dropped his backpack and walked slowly to the canvas. "Is that us?" Camille stepped back. She hadn't realized it until that moment, but the forms were taking shape, a tall, bright figure shielding 2 smaller ones beneath a sky full of stars. It was abstract, but alive. "It's our storm," she said, "and our survival." Ava climbed onto the couch, swinging her legs. "Can we paint with you?" Camille beamed. "Yes, tomorrow." That night, after dinner and dishes, after Ava's bedtime and Eli's quiet goodnight, Camille poured herself a cup of tea and opened her inbox for the first time in weeks. There were the usual things: bills, newsletters, a coupon for a shoe sale. And then there was a name she hadn't expected. Elenina Grayson. Subject, your work. Your voice. Your next step. Camille's heart skipped. Elenina Grayson was a curator for the Southern Collective of Modern Artists, respected, renowned, meticulous. Camille had once dreamed of just shaking her hand. She opened the email. "Camille, I saw a photograph of your piece, Resilience Through Blue, at a local gallery showcase. I don't know how I missed it when it first appeared, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Your use of space, your restraint, your fire. I'm curating a national exhibition on the theme of reclamation. Stories told through art about women who found strength through surrender. I want your work in it. 3 pieces. Full spotlight. We're also offering grant funding for emerging artists. I'd like to nominate you. This is your time." Elenina. Camille stared at the screen. Her hands began to tremble. This wasn't just a show. It was a door swinging wide, an invitation into a world she thought had closed long ago. She pressed a palm to her chest and closed her eyes. There was a version of herself, the girl who stayed up all night painting in a 1-bedroom apartment, who believed that brushstrokes could change the world, still living inside her, quiet but breathing. She'd just stopped listening, until now. Camille grabbed her phone, hands still trembling, and called Sasha. "I need a lawyer," she said. "For what?" Sasha asked. Camille smiled. "To help me sign my first National Gallery contract." There was a pause. Then, "Damn right you do." 2 days later, she told Eli and Ava. They whooped like it was Christmas morning. Ava begged to come to the opening. Eli asked if they could all wear matching outfits. Camille laughed so hard she cried, and then she painted. Harder than she ever had, every morning before sunrise, every evening after dinner. Each piece told a story, one of heartbreak, of fire, of love that bloomed despite frost. She titled one, The Gifts Returned, another Midnight on the Balcony, the last simply, What Remains. The gallery opening was in Charleston, 3 months later. The room was a cathedral of light and color, buzzing with critics, artists, collectors. Camille stood in a black satin dress, simple and elegant, her hair swept up with a single red ribbon, Ava's idea. Eli stood beside her in a navy suit, trying not to smile too much. Ava wore sparkles and twirled under the lights. Camille greeted everyone with a calm smile. She didn't look for Brandon. She didn't wonder if Sierra would show. They didn't matter. But then, she saw him, standing across the gallery under her largest piece, Reclamation. Brandon, older, smaller somehow, his posture unsure, his eyes rimmed red. Camille felt the world tilt slightly, but not the way it used to. It didn't rattle her. It just reminded her of where she was now. She walked toward him slowly. He turned when she approached, and when their eyes met, something in him broke. "Camille," he said, barely audible. "I saw the box, the photos, the drawings, your letter." She nodded once. "I know. I've been trying to make things right," he said, voice cracking. "With the kids, with myself. I started therapy. I'm trying." She studied him. The man who once made her feel small now looked lost in a sea of consequences. "I'm proud of you for trying," she said. "But this," she gestured to the gallery, to the air alive with her triumph. "This is mine." He nodded, tears brimming. "I hope one day Eli and Ava will let me earn back their trust," he said. "That's up to them," Camille replied. "But as for me," she smiled, soft, calm, unflinching, "I've already moved on." And she meant it. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, back to her children, back to the life she'd painted back into existence with every color she thought she'd lost. Weeks passed, then months. The gallery's spotlight faded into warm memory, but its impact lingered like the echo of applause in an empty theater. Camille's inbox began to fill, not with apologies or pleas, but with invitations. Art shows, school murals, a commission for a healing center in Atlanta that said her piece, Midnight on the Balcony, made survivors cry in the best way. Camille wasn't just rebuilding her life anymore. She was reimagining it, one stroke at a time. She converted the garage into a studio, clearing space beside old holiday bins and bikes for a long work table and rows of paint. She put Ava's drawings on the wall, real estate beside her own. She let Eli help build the new shelves, just the two of them with a drill, mismatched screws, and the kind of laughter that sounded like freedom. Every day felt a little wider than the last. One Thursday evening in late spring, Camille stood in the garden, barefoot in the grass, watering a row of tulips she and Ava had planted in crooked rows. The sun dipped low behind the fence, staining the world in gold. She heard the door creak open behind her. Eli's voice carried across the yard. "Mom, someone's at the door." She wiped her hands on her jeans and walked back up the porch. It was a delivery. A small package, no return address. Just her name, Camille Harper, written in neat, hesitant handwriting. She brought it inside, set it gently on the table and opened it. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was the music box. A note was tucked beneath it. "I didn't know what I was doing then, but I know now what I lost. Ava should fall asleep to this, not forget it ever existed. I can't change the past. But maybe I can honor it, Brandon." Camille stared at it for a long moment. Then she wound the key. The music played, soft and haunting, filling the kitchen with a melody she hadn't heard in months. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just listened. And when Ava ran in moments later, dancing in socks and twirling to the tune, Camille bent down and placed the music box back on its old shelf, like a painting restored to the right wall. Eli came next, carrying a sketchbook he wanted her to review. Camille pulled him close, kissed his cheek, and looked at the page. A family of 3, holding hands, laughing, surrounded by a swirl of color. "I want to make this into a real painting," he said. Camille's voice caught. "You will." She walked to the studio, picked up her brush, and stared at a blank canvas. This one wasn't for anyone else. Not for the gallery, not for the grant, not even for closure. It was for joy. She dipped the brush into soft violet, then coral, then pale blue like sky just before dawn. As she painted, laughter echoed from the other room. Ava teasing Eli, Eli pretending to be annoyed, the music box still playing softly in the background. The house wasn't perfect. The healing wasn't finished, but it was alive. It was full. It was hers. And as the first strokes came together, soft lines, bold edges, a woman with light in her eyes, Camille finally saw it. She hadn't just survived Brandon. She hadn't just outlasted Sierra. She hadn't just rebuilt. She had risen. And in the gallery of her life, that moment, this moment, was the masterpiece. If you've ever been broken, if someone ever tried to reduce your worth to a price tag or walked away like you were disposable, let this story remind you. You are not defined by what they took. You are defined by what you kept. Your dignity, your fire, your voice. Camille didn't just return the gifts, she reclaimed her power. And in the end, it wasn't the boxes Brandon received that changed everything. It was the one he never opened. Because some things, love, presence, self-worth, aren't listed on receipts. They're lived. And in Camille's case, they were painted, stroke by brilliant stroke, into a life no one could take from her again. Now tell us, what would you never let them take from you? Drop it in the comments below. We'll be reading every word.